Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. Speaking of authors,
Okay.
today's guest is American forensic scientist. She was a death investigator for New York City and is the author of a great memoir, What the Dead Know: Learning About Life as a New York City Death Investigator. Barbara Butcher, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Vic, for having me on. Great to meet you.
Likewise. And Barbara, I have to tell you, when I saw you on that Netflix series, Homicide New York, I said to myself, I have to figure out a way to get this woman on my show. Barbara, could you please tell our listeners a little something about yourself?
I started out as a death investigator with the New York City Medical Examiner's Office in 1992. Now, those were the glory days when we were getting 2,400 homicides a year in New York City alone. That was incredible. So I came in, I trained, I had a background in medicine and surgery specifically, but when I came in and trained with NYPD, becoming a real investigator, I thought I had stepped into the most fascinating career in the entire world. And I did. It was fantastic. I got to do science. I got to have the thrill of working with NYPD, finding out how evidence was interpreted and where it led us. And I had a hell of a good time. Now, it was soul crushing. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure you know about that too, but it was amazing.
What got you into the world of forensic science?
Oddly enough, it was a career counseling service. Now, when I was a kid, the neighborhood kids used to bring me roadkill, and I had a dissecting kit, a chemistry set, and a microscope. So they'd bring me the roadkill, and I'd open it up and say, oh, look, the right side of the rib cage is crushed. The lung is very hemorrhaging, is bleeding. And on the outside, notice these squiggly black lines in a pattern. That means this raccoon was run over by a car, and that's how he died. And the kids would be like, woo, wow. And so I had a penchant for it very early on. Then I was working as a surgical PA, physician assistant, and then a hospital administrator, and I was bored to hell. I went to a career counseling service, and they said, well, they gave me all those tests, Minnesota multiphasic, Briggs-Myers, etc. They said, you should either be a poultry veterinarian or a coroner. I said, poultry? Why poultry? He said, well, when your patients didn't get well or didn't do well, it really upset you emotionally. So we wouldn't put you with puppies and kittens. That would really hurt. But chickens, they got beady little eyes. Nobody cares about them. I said, oh, I'll take the dead people. I figured it wouldn't be too emotional because they were already dead. But I forgot. They have families. That's hard. That's emotional. So they told me at the counseling service to go find the one person in New York City who you thought had the best job in the world. And I went to Dr. Charles Hirsch, chief medical examiner, called him. He said, sure, love to talk to you. I just wanted to hear about his work. And they offered me a job at that time as an investigator. I was like, whoa, me?
What years were you active with the New York City Medical Examiner's Office?
I started in the I think it's September 1992, and I was there as a death investigator for the first 10, 11 years. And then I was director of investigations and director of forensic sciences. Eventually, blah, 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 chief of staff when I retired in 2016. So I had the best part of my career, even though it paid less and it was more difficult to do, was being out on the streets, working with the cops, just doing investigations, being in the gritty heart of the job. Administration.
As a young cop, early in my career, I had my fair share of the NYPD. You've heard this expression, sitting on a DOA, a suspicious death, waiting for the medical examiner to come around and make a determination. On average, when you were rocking and rolling, how many DOAs a day or a week would you respond to?
We alternated between working the office and working the streets. In the office, you'd take calls from hospitals, ER docs. We got a guy shot in here, he's dead. And so every other day, I would work the streets, and I would probably get 3 a day on average. Now, back in the early days, I could count on 3 or 4 homicides a week of mine
Right.
to do. Plus, I saw everybody else's coming through the autopsy room. So they were swarming the place. A lot of it was drug related, of course,
Yeah.
back in that days. So I would do 3 or 4 death scenes a day. Now, some of them were natural, just somebody died alone and needed to be looked at. Some of them were suicide. Some of them were horrible accidents, freaky accidents. And some, of course, were homicides. So it was an active time, very active time. And I finished out my time on the streets pretty much with 9/11. So it went from really bad to leveling out to really bad.
So you were responding to several a day, and there's how many investigators at a time were working on a shift?
We generally have 4 in Manhattan, 4 in Brooklyn, 2 or 3 in the Bronx, and 1 in Staten Island. Or maybe Brooklyn would cover Staten Island, depending on the day. There's not much murder out there.
I remember early on, as a rookie cop, that's where they send you to relieve the guy that's sitting on the DOA, wait for the medical examiner. And I always remember, I never dealt with you. I got hired in '88, but we had never crossed paths to my knowledge. But I always remember when the medical examiner would show up, just being, they always always looked overworked, overwhelmed, and looked tired. That was the impression I got as a kid, just seeing them come through the room.
Yeah, and there was such an unusual milieu of an atmosphere that we worked in. I could walk into a natural death of an old man all alone, no family, no friends, and he's decomposed because nobody checked on him. And the smell is, of course, overwhelming. I could see that, then go to a homicide, a brutal one, woman raped and killed. And then I'd stumble into an accident where a guy thought it might be fun, a teenager, I should say, ride the elevators. You remember elevator surfing?
Yeah.
They still about 400 incidents a year of elevator surfing. And it's so ridiculous. You jump up on the top and you go sailing through the tunnels until something knocks you in the head. Down you go. So that kind of thing was emotionally wearing, not just physically wearing.
Well, for our listeners, can you explain the mindset that you had? You're called to a suspicious death, maybe not necessarily something obvious, but they call you guys anyway, and you're walking into an apartment, you're looking around. Could you just break down the mindset of what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever I got notified of a death, suspicious death, let's call it, or a traumatic death, I would go to the scene, check in with the first officer at the door, and then just step into the threshold. And I'd take the whole thing in. Long ago, I was taught, if you want to be a good investigator, take your hands off your ears, put them over your mouth. Don't talk. Listen to the answers. Let the room speak to you. So if I walked in and saw scales, white powder, glassine envelopes, little spoons and things, I think, oh, drug dealers, here we go. Or I could walk into another room where they have bookshelves lined with good books, PBS tote bags, Birkenstock sandals. That's a whole different lifestyle, right?
Right.
So I absorb that feeling, that lifestyle, because that gives me a hint, because how you live often determines how you die. So having done that, I would ask we used to call them this is too vulgar, but the HMFIC, the head motherfucker in charge.
You're fine.
Okay, good. I go to him, the first detective, the lead detective, and say, what do you want? And he'd say, oh, I got this and that. Wife came home, found him with a stab wound to the chest, but not sure if he did it to himself or somebody came in. And then I would just start to walk through the rooms carefully. I don't want to step in anything. I don't want to ruin evidence. In the early days, we just went in our street clothes. Later, of course, we'd go in Tyvek, booties, hairnets, the whole bit. So in taking in the room, I would get a better feeling for what's happening. And then I would take pictures, document everything in the room, do sketches if I had to. Now, crime scene's doing this too, right? But our investigation is independent of the police, cooperative, but independent. Sometimes we differ in our interpretations of evidence. So having done that, I would keep circling in until I get to the body. That's the last thing I'm going to touch. So if we had suspicions at this point, we'd ask crime scene to come in, or even before. I would do my examination of the body, the external exam, with crime scenes standing over me because I want them to see what I'm seeing. So if I show a piece of fibers coming out of a jacket in the outward direction, and then he's laying in a pool of blood, I know damn well he was shot in the back. So I would call crime scene over and demonstrate to them what I was doing and what I was finding. I was very, very careful not to disturb evidence. So I wouldn't undress the body. I might open the shirt a bit and demonstrate the wounds for them so we could both photograph the wounds, bag the hands if we suspected a violent death,
Right.
and just get an overall feeling for the body, document everything on it, being careful of hair, fibers, prints, anything. And if it was deemed suspicious, which if somebody had a knife, in their chest, then we take it in. Or if we found a suicide note and the exterior door was double locked and the windows were locked and it was a perfectly sealed apartment and he's got a knife in his chest, we're thinking suicide. But I don't count that until I find more evidence. I'll search the apartment. One of the good things about being a cop investigator than a police department is that I have the ability to snoop around in all their affairs. Having seen the body, we'd go around the apartment again, and crime scene would show me what they found: prints, blood spatter, things like that. And then we'd discuss. We'd relate the body to the scene, and the body is what makes it a death scene. So that body's mine. And inevitably, we come to some agreement. Yeah, this looks like a homicide or this looks like a suicide, but we're bringing it in. And they'll let me know later on autopsy the next morning what else they found. Like, what did the girlfriend say? What did the wife say? Things like that. And sometimes the witnesses are right there at the scene with the family members. And of course, your guys question them, and I do too. I ask about health things. I ask about psychological state. And together, we fix it. We solve it. No, we can't fix it. They're already dead. I'm a last responder, don't forget.
Well, that's true.
I come in when it's too late to do anything about it, except maybe get some justice now.
Your dad was a retired NYPD deputy inspector. Do you think that helped you as far as how to deal with cops, interact with cops, and just your investigative state?
Absolutely. You know as well as anyone that the police department has a certain culture, a certain language, a certain humor. There's a dark humor that we all use to forestall the emotions that come over you when you see tragic things every day. And there's a code of loyalty and cooperation. So I knew how to talk to cops. I'll tell you a weird story. Well, it's a funny story, actually. Early on in my career, I was training for the first 3 months. I went out on every dead guy in town. All the investigators were taking me out to their scenes. So I was getting the hang of it. And then when I was allowed to do my first homicide on my own, I went out, came to the door, and there was a detective standing there. He said, "Yeah, honey, how can I help you?" I said, "Oh, I'm Barbara Butcher. I'm from the medical examiner's office. I'm here to examine the body." He said, "No, don't worry about it. Crime scene's got it." I said, No, it's the body. It's mine. I have to do the investigation." He said, all right, come on in. And I thought, this is some bullshit. Wow, this doesn't work right. And next time it happened, which was almost 3 months later, cop says, "Yes, sweetheart, how can I help you? What do you need?" I said, I don't think you can help me, but maybe I can help you. Because I'm going to go in there, I'm going to investigate and examine that body, and I'm going to tell you how he died, when he died, and maybe even who did it. And then when you're in court testifying on this case and the judge says, "Well, detective, how did you know these things?" You can say, "Barbara Butcher told me." And he went, "Whoa." And he laughed, brought me in. And I think that word must have spread that I was weird, but workable. And I never had a problem after that with any police officer telling me, "You don't need to do this," or "You don't need to be here." Well, I do remember, this was weird. There was a big case, a well-known guy dies, and it was a homicide. And of course, all the star chiefs come in. Everybody with a star is in there, the inspector, deputy inspectors,
Yeah.
chiefs. Well, and I was bent over the body, and a chief tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey, excuse me, step aside." I turned around with my bloody gloves. I'm like, "What?" I said, "I'm working here." And the detectives are looking at him. He just, he said, "Excuse me, I just need to see this." I'm like, "Hey, help yourself." But other than him No problems after. I was strong.
Well, 2 points as far as chiefs and upper management, they do think that they have a backstage pass to crime scenes. And
Yeah,
I've seen that and them driving into areas where they still haven't gotten tire tracks. And yeah, so that can be a problem. And what can you say? They can crush your career as a cop. And I
yeah.
asked around, you said that you came off as weird. I asked around before we spoke. That's not the vibe I got. From what I was told by a few people, you didn't take crap from anybody.
That is very true. Yes, that's very true. But I was told by one or two officers that I seemed a little weird because I took great interest in unusual findings. Like, look, he's decomposed, and we can tell that he started on the bed, then they rolled him over because there's skin sticking there, and then they moved him to this corner, and then they dragged him over to that table. And they'd be like, what? Nothing. It's just interesting. I loved my job.
It sounds it. Were you based in Manhattan or were you up in the Bronx or you went anywhere?
I was based in Manhattan, but a lot of times we didn't have coverage, say on the midnight to 8. When I worked the night shift, I'd crawl over into the Bronx or run down to do something.
Yeah, I was a Bronx guy. That's why I was asking.
Yeah.
From my memory, when I was a young cop, the morgue was is it still in Bellevue?
No, there is a morgue well, it's part of Bellevue, and that's for the unclaimed, unidentified bodies. So there's about 100 of those at any given time kept in a small morgue. But the morgue itself is in the autopsy suite morgue, excuse me, is in the office of chief medical examiner on 30th Street and First Avenue. And there we keep the bodies we're actively working with.
How long will they keep the unclaimed before they send them out to Potter's Field?
Some of them have been kept for extended periods because we knew they were veterans. And then you have to go through all the Veterans Affairs office and get
Yeah.
them fully recognized, properly buried. So we keep them for an extended time. Or a victim of a homicide when they were unidentified, unclaimed by anyone, but openly still being investigated. Most bodies are turned over to the funeral home and the family after an autopsy. Some we kept for a very long time, years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then every so often, every week there's a shipment of unclaimed, identified, but they're not claimed by any, and they're shipped and buried at Potter's Field, which, by the way, is actually a lovely place.
I was going to ask you that. Have you ever been out there?
Yeah, they were running out of burial space, which they still are. It was well over 1 million people there, several million maybe. They asked us to come out and take a look and see what was the capacity, where did we think we should do next? What did we think we should do next? And so I toured it and I saw it on this, I think it was an autumn day, that looking out over the Long Island Sound on a slight hillside was a beautiful place to be buried, even though it's in a trench 3 deep. So what? You're getting to see beautiful, beautiful scenery and it's peaceful. So I asked the captain of Rikers, they were in charge of it, the burials. I said, any chance I could get buried here? He said, I don't think so. But, if you lose everything and nobody claims you, yeah, maybe you'll wind up here.
Well,
It was
I grew up in Throgs Neck. So when we were kids and we figured out what that Hart's Island was for, a couple of times when someone had a boat, we'd go out there and then we saw the signs, no trespassing. And we were always like, and a couple of times we saw people out there, I guess groundskeepers or something. So we didn't have the nerve, but there was definitely a couple of plans to go out there and, snoop around.
It was a very fun thing for a kid, very mysterious.
So Barbara, you've seen numerous ways people have died. Can you go into a few that at first baffled you?
There was a case I was just looking over the other day, and it baffled me because it made no sense whatsoever. What happened is, over on the West Side Market for West Side Manhattan, there was a basement area where all the cardboard boxes and stock were taken, and there was a compressor for those boxes, bale and wire.
Yeah.
Oh, wire and bale, whatever they call that. And a young guy, I think he was only 18, maybe 20, he was halfway into the baler and this crusher, and it had come down on him nearly split him in half. I thought, what the hell? How did that happen? There's safety mechanisms. And why? I brought in a forensic engineer and we looked over the machinery. We got plans from the company and we saw that there was a safety mechanism. In order to bring the crusher down, you put in your cardboard and you close the door and then you walked over to a little button that had to
Right.
be pressed before you could turn it on. But because that was slow, walking back and forth, it looked like one of the guys had taken a matchbook cup, jammed it up, and stuck it into that safety button so it was permanently on. So now he could stand there at the open baler, keep pushing in the cardboard, and keep crushing it. Okay, I understand how it happened, but why did that happen? I thought maybe he lost a ring or his watch fell in there. Maybe a memento from his family. He had to get it. Well, I pulled out every single one of those boxes and searched everything with a magnifying glass to see what could possibly have fallen. Nothing. Could it have been a homicide? There was video, but I believe it only covered like the stairway. And, I never got to be on the full investigation. When they get to the end, when the detectives have talked to everyone, made a determination. But we ruled it an accident at the medical examiner's office. But he wasn't suicidal by any means, and that's a horrible way to die. He was squashed. It's not likely it was a homicide because they said no one was there down there with him. How do they know? Maybe somebody came in through a basement window. All in all, it never made any sense to me and still doesn't to this day.
So that's one of the ones that'll haunt you that you can't really put your finger on exactly what happened.
Yeah. Yes, that always bothers me. And it was just a horrible way to die, too. Another thing baffles me. Now, back in the 90s and especially in the heavy drug days, prostitutes were very frequent victims of homicide. They'd be out in an alleyway, a tent in the park, over by the piers, usually strangled, abandoned there, dead, and found by somebody who was passing by. At the same time, there were a lot of homicides of prostitutes in those hot sheet hotels. $30 for 3 hours, in and out, nobody gets hurt, cash money. And the prostitutes would have their Johns pay for that, and they'd be in there for a bit. And if the woman didn't show up after 3 hours, didn't come out of the room, they'd, of course, go in and find her dead. And this became a pattern after a while. I was used to the prostitutes, the sex workers, is the correct term now. Sex workers, yeah, we have to keep everything very strict terminology, sex workers. So it became a pattern with these hotels, these hot sheet places, and it was always the same. It seemed like there was a condom on the floor, right? A used condom, but not used, if you know what I mean. It was not contaminated with anything. It was just pulled off, wrinkled, thrown on the floor. And then the prostitute, who would seem to be sitting up at the end of the bed, is strangled, flung backwards. He leaves. So I thought, what if a guy pays for sex and he can't perform and he gets furious and he blames her, asks her for oral sex or something, still not working, and he gets furious and he strangles her and throws her around. And then someone told me, one of the detectives had
Told you.
he heard from some other precincts that some of these cases, especially the hot sheet motel ones, where similar guy was known to be seen on the video cams at the front desk, whatever, that hole in the wall they stick their head out of. Here, pass the cash, here's your key. That this guy wore a certain kind of hat, and it was always pulled down so you couldn't see his face. But the rumor was that he was this well-known saxophone player uptown. And there was even an article in the Times saying pattern seen, multiple prostitute murders or sex worker murders. And nothing ever came of it. And that pisses me off terribly. They never could get his face on the video, never had a name. I don't know if they ever printed the rooms and came up with anything. But, in that time, and I hate to say it, but some homicides were considered like almost a throwaway, like drug addicts, sex workers, homeless guys. alcoholics in the street. You know, it was just, there were so many of them and there was so little time to work a case that it became like almost like a throwaway, you know, just
So you
not
got away with
solved.
it.
Yeah, so he got away with it. And that's going to bother me for a good long while. I think about it all the time. Who was this guy? Where is he? And why did they stop? After about 2.5, 3 years of this, we weren't getting as many, at least not in Manhattan. Who knows?
He could have passed. He could have messed with the wrong prostitute or pimp,
Yeah,
and he might be a DOA somewhere that looked like a
yeah,
robbery,
yeah.
that they never
Yeah,
put it together.
yeah. Maybe he got caught doing something and thrown in jail. Who knows? Somewhere else in Jersey, you know?
That's
But
possible. Yeah, right over the
yeah.
bridge. Barbara, back in the early 90s, the mafia was rocking and rolling, and they would routinely leave people dead in the street. Did you ever handle any mob hits? I like to smile.
Yes, but it was gang related. I had a couple of gang related cases and some of them were junior mafia. You know, it was like where they weren't made men yet, but they had to prove their bones. I think they call it their bones. That's it. Yeah. Prove they could kill. So there were a couple of senseless hits. Like there was a big drug dealer uptown in Harlem, Washington Heights. No, it was in Harlem. Had these 3 kids that were runners for him, like 15, 16 years old. They were so low level. They just had the responsibility to deliver things. And one night they were taken up to a rooftop and each shot in the back of the head. One, two, three. Two 15-year-olds and a 16-year-old. And I'm like, geez, what the hell is that? A week later, we hear that now there's revenge because these kids were trespassing on territory run by the mafia or a mob of some kind. And that's why they were killed. So now revenge is going to be taken against them by the gang. So it was a back and forth kind of thing. And, you know, so Joey shoots Tyrone. Tyrone's friends kill Felix. Felix's friends. And actually, I believe that part of the reason that homicides fell off so rapidly is they were killing each other off. I mean, one drug dealer was shooting another every single day.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe there weren't enough of them left to keep that homicide rate up there in the 2000s. Who knows?
What I wanted to ask you is, you respond to a murder scene, you do your investigation, you do the autopsy, hopefully the killer gets caught, and then sometimes it goes to trial years later, and then you get subpoenaed to sit there as an expert witness or testify as to what you did in the investigation. What's it like for you to put a face to the person that created this work for you?
So good. Oh, I love it. And you know, you said years later it'll go to
Yeah.
trial. Guess what? I just testified 2 weeks ago. I've been retired 10 years. 2 weeks ago, I testified on a case I did 31 years ago. Can you imagine? 31 years. It was a double homicide, a mother and her young daughter. And I had a very strong suspicion of who it was back then. Detectives agreed with me. They could never prove it. Nothing in the DNA bank matched to what this guy left behind. I can't say too much on this because
Right.
it's still trial right now. And finally went through a few cold case investigations. Finally, someone ran the DNA again. This time it hit because the guy had been picked up on an assault charge. He never did anything for those 31 years. Killed a mother and a daughter, did nothing, and did an assault. Now he's in the data bank, and they picked him up. Can you imagine running around 31 years after killing a mother and a daughter? And I was thrilled to be able to get a stand and tell what I knew. I could tell exactly what I saw, exactly how I interpreted, and why the defense was wrong.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I was wondering about that. I mean, when I first retired, for like the first 6 months or a year, I would get subpoenaed to testify in old cases, and then it just kind of stopped. But I was involved in auto theft. Statute of limitations run out on things like that. The statute of limitations never runs out on a homicides. I figured you would continue to get pulled back into the mix.
Yeah, I love it.
Sure you do. Obviously, you've had to deal with every stage of human decomposition. Have you ever had a case, I'm sure you have, that you had to deal with skeletal remains?
Yes, and it was so interesting. There was a house, what do they call that? A squat. The building's been abandoned. People live in various rooms without heat or water, but they make do. And this one guy was found in an apartment and he was completely skeletonized except for a thin layer of like leathery skin on top. But yet all the organs inside were gone. He had been there a long time. And I figured out that he was mummified, but I thought, wait a minute. His organs should have decomposed and kept him mummified. Aha, said a cop with a lot of experience, said to me, Barbara, here's what happens. He dies from something, and then the rats come up and it's cold in here. They want to get where it's warm. So they eat through into the body cavity, eat up all the organs, stay nice and warm in there. Then they leave the way they came. Now you've got a hollow person with like mummified skin and skeletal bones. Wow, that's fabulous. That's amazing. Like nature regenerating itself almost. Anyway, yeah, so that's what happened. And oddly and sadly, when I pulled from the shoulder to turn him over, look for anything unusual, his arm came off. I mean, he was so wildly mummified. And he was just coming apart. And we never could figure out why he died because there was nothing left of a body that I could really put any details on. So it would have been anything.
How long do you think he was there for?
More than a year.
Years?
I think at least a year. I think 1 year was about right. Because it had to have been through autumn and a winter. Because if it died in summer, then he would really be rotting very quickly in the heat of summer. But no, I think it was about a year.
Have you ever had to investigate the death of a hoarder?
Yes, so many of them. Oh my God. And I have a very, very close friend who is bordering on that now. But, there was one case I used to call it, Where's Waldo? Remember that game? We had to find
sure.
the cat. So this guy had stocked his house with so much junk, newspapers, clothes, just trash. And it was up to the ceilings. So some neighbor had heard a thudding noise, and then a smell started to come out of the apartment. And she knew that he was a hoarder. They called the police. We couldn't get the door open because the trash was up against it. So wait a second, how are we going to do this? So ESU comes, and through the window, they break everything out, and they slide in like a pallet of wood, half a sheet of plywood, and cut it on the long, lit it in, and then the officer surfed across the top of this pile. He gets to the doorway, and what he sees is that this guy has set booby traps, just like the Collier brothers and back in the day in the 40s. He set booby traps so that anyone coming in and trying to steal the ward would trip a wire that would pull down the trash on him. Well, he tripped his own wire going to the door. Everything came down, crushed him. That was the end of him. So we were able to then get to the front door. And, he knocked off the hinges. They broke through it. And there was the guy. It was sad. The Collier brothers, I don't know if people still know about this case, but two wealthy young men, brothers, lived in a townhouse in Harlem, in that beautiful brownstone, and filled it to the rafters with pianos, a car, thousands of new, tens of thousands, a library full of books, so much stuff. It was just, they had to knock the building down. It was just too much.
Well, speaking of people in squalor, have you had to investigate the death of someone living in a subway tunnel or the sewer system?
I've never done a sewer system case, but I have done plenty in the tunnels. Now, two of my favorite cases happened in the abandoned Amtrak tunnels, where a lot of people, they call them the mole people. They're not mole people. They're just people who live in caves. And they actually have caves through these tunnels, and they furnish them. They have a bed. They have sheets, books, candlelight, and they even cook in there. So I've done a case like that. And then another one with a woman who, this was funny, she was found on the tracks, abandoned for many, many years. But between two cement barricades, and she was all bashed up, cut, lacerated, head beaten in, everything, bruised up. And a detective came along. I'm not going to say his name, but he was kind of well known, old guy. And he'd say, but what if, just what if she was standing by the live tracks over there, and a train hit her, and it banged her head on this side, and then she tumbled, it banged her head on that side. And then the top of the head got hit. And then the cuts, and she landed here. I said, Jimmy, Anything's possible except that.
Yeah, he wants to close it out.
Exactly. And he did this to me with other cases too. Like, what if he fell? So it was clear that she was beaten in the head. And, and we even found the bloody rock.
Uh,
I've investigated several cases, 3 or 4 people who live in the tunnels and then subway tunnels. I've seen a subway surfer who fell off. He got knocked off and he was caught between the wall and the train. And so there was an endless mess down the tracks. And I went down there with ESU and we just got all the pieces. And a couple with just people, drug overdoses in a subway tunnel. And the occasional just, falling off on the platform, hit the third rail, where his arm hit the third rail. Yeah, there's been a couple of those. And, a lot of people said to me, Barbara, you're a woman. You're dressed in a nice suit. What the hell are you doing walking down the subway tracks at night or going in these tunnels? Can't you just let the cops go in and do it and bring the stuff out to you? No, my case, my eyes, my ears. I take my cases very seriously, very seriously. In fact, the one I just testified on recently, the defense attorney said to me, Miss Butcher, this was a very serious, important case, wasn't it? And I said, all cases are serious and important. He said, no, but I mean, this one was particularly serious and needed a hard work. I said, again, counselor, all my cases were important and serious, and all of them deserve life. The jury was like, yeah.
Yeah, he's trying to set you up.
Yeah.
So you were involved in the George Cobo and Tony Lee Simpson case. Could you go into that just a little?
Sure. That was interesting. 2 men, one 20, the other in his 60s, live in a 2-bedroom, very nice apartment. And when they don't show up for something, they were found, one in one bedroom, one in the living room, with their throats slashed. The younger man was in the living room, and it was so much blood. And I could tell by the blood spatter and blood spray that he had been standing up when his throat was cut and the carotid made the spray. So I could tell where he was standing and where the perpetrator was standing. Then in the other room, the bedroom, the older man also had his throat slashed, but he had hesitation marks. When they start to stab, they try to do it and then they finally get it. And he had defense cuts on his hands. He was trying to get the guy away. It was an awful thing. And we were investigating that, looking at the room, and the doorman said that 2 men had come up earlier. Again, a younger man and an older man. And they wanted to look at a piano or something. And there was a grand piano in there. And what struck me was that how would you steal a piano? If they were there to rob something, how would you steal that piano? Okay. Anyway, one of my colleagues and a detective came into the office and said, hey, we've got a similar case. Prince Teddy Kendajar and his wife, the Princess of India, throat slashed, throttled, beaten. The apartment was trashed and lots of jewelry was taken. So they were very similar. So this is, you killed 4 people, you're a serial killer. And the leads went everywhere. They were chasing down all kinds of leads, finding out who this was. But and oddly enough, George Cobo and Tony Lee Simpson, who was his sexual partner, they went out to Reno and they were spending money on the credit cards of their victims. They were doing all kinds of crazy things. And then one day they have a fight, a lover's quarrel. George gets really furious. Tony goes slamming out the door, and George calls the police and says, my partner has run off. You need to get him. And by the way, he's wanted for murder in New York City. So, of course, police are there instantly. And he just ratted himself out. They picked up George and Tony, and those were your guys. So I got to meet George Cobo and Tony Lee Simpson, the killers of 4 people. And George was very funny. He was actually charming. When I told him that I needed to pull 30 hairs from his head, he said, oh, my dear, I'm already balding. Must you? And I said, all right, Mr. Cobo, I'll pick them evenly from around your head so it doesn't leave any bald spots. And he was, oh, thank you, my dear. He was charming and funny. Then they bring, when I take his DNA, his blood, all this stuff. And then they bring in Tony Lee Simpson. I think he was about 28, but in a wolfish way. He had the long jaw. He had that look in his eyes of disconnection. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as an object. How could I be useful to him? What could he use me for? You know those eyes, as black as a
Yep.
wolf. No humanity, no connection. He scared me. And when I told him I had to pluck pubic hair and take blood, he just stared straight ahead. He scared the hell out of me. Anyway, they were both convicted. George died in jail, and Tony is serving multiple life sentences.
It's so funny you bring up that look. My brother and I were talking about that one time about having arrested certain people and dealt with certain people. It's like they're just looking right through you, and you can see the wheels in motion. What can I get out of this person, or what can I do just to go right through them?
Yep.
My brother actually, before he was a member of the NYPD, worked on Rikers Island. He was a correction officer, and he had Colombo soldier Greg Scarpa. They used to call him the Grim Reaper. My brother said exactly, just like he was nice and everything, but like a wolf. I mean, I couldn't have put it any better.
It's a scary thing to see. It's not human, really. There's something wrong.
Barbara, I was raised Catholic. I think you were raised Catholic as well, right?
Yep.
So we were taught to believe in heaven, hell, purgatory. Do you believe in life after death?
Actually, I believe in a form of it, and that is that our bodies are the rental cars that we get around in when we're on Earth, when we're alive. And some of them go out old and battered, and others crash prematurely and are gone. But the soul, energy, packet of energy that drives us. And I think that goes back to whatever universal energy there is. That energy is neither created nor destroyed. So now you got this big pile of souls and energy. And so when a new person is born, yeah, they pluck it. Maybe they get a little bit of someone else. You know, these people who have past life memories. Maybe they come back as themselves. I don't know. But I don't believe in heaven or hell. I just believe that you go and come back, go and come back. Maybe.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Given the chance, would you go back and do it all over again, your former career?
Hell yes. I'd start today. If they, during COVID, I thought I called my buddy there, Frank. Guy had worked for me for years, and he was now in charge. And I said, Frank, you need me, right? He said, yeah, we could use you. Let me check with administration. Nope, because there was some political sensitivities. You have to read my book to know that. It's called What the Dead Know.
I was going to segue right into that. Barbara, please tell us about your book, What the Dead Know, Learning About Life as a New York City Death Investigator. Please.
This book is a memoir. I started out to write the cases I've done. They're so interesting. There's so many of them. And so I was writing my adventures. And then my editor said to me, where are you? I said, I'm right here. He said, no, where are you in the book? I want to see what you're seeing, smell it, taste it, hear it. I want to know what you felt like in every one of those cases. So I said, what, you want me to cry? He said, yeah, I want you to cry. So I went back and I rewrote it with me in it, with what it felt like and what I saw, what I knew. And so it became a memoir of ups and downs of my life. My life has had a lot of hills and valleys, been some tough times, but overwhelmingly, it wound up really good. Now, not only do I have a book out, I have a television show of my very own. It's called The Death Investigator with Barbara Butcher, and it's on the Oxygen Network, which is, on the cable. And it's doing quite well. It's actually number 2 for their network. Number 1 is Cold Case with Kelly somebody. I'll beat her in time. It takes you back to my old cases. We go back to where it happened. I go back with the detective who originally worked with me, and we go through that case and show what happened and how it was solved. It's a good show. It's fun.
And it's on Oxygen?
It's on Oxygen Network. Saturdays at 9 p.m. and there's 10 episodes.
And one more time, what's the name of your book, and where can our listeners pick up a copy?
What the Dead Know, Learning About Life as a New York City Death Investigator is available everywhere. Amazon's easy. It's in local bookstores. It's in paperback now too, so get a little bargain.
Barbara Butcher, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for your service, and it was an honor for me to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Vic. It was a pleasure. It was fun talking to you.
As always, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Toronto, Ontario, Staten Island, New York, Montreal, Quebec, Tucson, Arizona, and Blackwood, New Jersey. If you work in law enforcement or had an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFroy50. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you enjoy the content, check out my Amazon author page. Type in my name, Vic, Froy like the car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free. Thank you again, everyone, and I'll see you next week.